Look at the map of Asia. For the last decade, we have been told a very specific story about this region. We were told that as China slows down, India will rise. We were told that the global supply chain is shifting from the world's factory in Beijing to the world's back office in New Delhi. Western politicians call it friendshoring. Economists call it the China plus one strategy. But today, I am here to tell you that this narrative is cracking. In fact, it might already be dead. A massive geopolitical shift just happened in the seafood industry, and almost nobody noticed. It started with a ban. China blocked $500 million worth of Japanese seafood. On paper, this looked like the golden ticket for India. India has the coastline. India has the labor. India has the product. Logic dictates that India should have stepped in and captured that market overnight, but they didn't. Instead, India found itself trapped in a geopolitical vice grip, squeezed from the west by American protectionism, and blocked from the east by Chinese strategic maneuvering. The failure of India to replace Japan is not just a story about fish. It is a warning sign for the entire global economy. It proves that in 2025, having cheap labor is no longer a competitive advantage. It proves that the era of free trade is over. We are entering a new era, an era where trade is weaponized, where tariffs are the new diplomacy, and where quality standards are just a polite way of saying, you are not welcome here. In this video, we are going to dissect how the world's two superpowers, the US and China, are unknowingly working together to crush emerging economies. We will explain why your grocery bill is about to become a geopolitical tax, and we will reveal the real winner of this trade war, a European nation that played the game better than anyone else. The American hammer. Tariffs as a weapon. To understand why India failed, we first have to look at Washington. For years, the United States has been the single largest buyer of Indian seafood. It was a symbiotic relationship. American consumers got cheap shrimp, Indian farmers got hard currency. But the political winds in Washington have shifted dramatically. The mantra is no longer free trade. It is America first. And this applies to everyone, even strategic allies like India. The U.S. government has launched a devastating economic offensive against Indian exports. They call it anti-dumping duties and countervailing duties. But let's call it what it really is, economic warfare. The premise is simple. The U.S. Department of Commerce argues that the Indian government is unfairly subsidizing its shrimp industry. They claim that Indian farmers are selling shrimp below the cost of production to destroy American competition, specifically the shrimpers in the Gulf of Mexico, Louisiana, Texas, Alabama. These are critical swing states. These are voters. So to protect them, the U.S. has slapped aggressive tariffs on Indian imports. We are talking about combined duties that effectively act as a 50% tax on certain exporters. Think about the impact of that number, 50%. In an industry where profit margins are razor thin, often less than 5%, a 50% tariff is a death sentence. It wipes out the competitive advantage of cheap labor instantly. Suddenly, Indian shrimp is no longer the cheapest option on the shelf. But there is a deeper geopolitical game being played here. Why is the U.S. hitting India so hard right now? India is supposed to be a member of the Quad, the security alliance against China. So why is Washington punishing its own ally? Because trade policy and security policy are no longer aligned. The U.S. is signaling that friendshoring has limits. You can be a military partner, but if you threaten American industry, you will be taxed. Furthermore, this is a leverage play. India has refused to stop buying Russian oil. India maintains a policy of strategic neutrality. By squeezing India's export economy, specifically a sector that employs millions of rural voters, Washington is applying subtle pressure on New Delhi. It is a reminder of who holds the keys to the global market. The result? Panic in the Indian aquaculture sector. Processing plants in Andhra Pradesh are shutting down. Farmers are letting their ponds go dry because they cannot afford the feed. The American hammer has shattered the confidence of the Indian exporter. And just when they thought they could pivot to China to save themselves, they ran into a wall. The Chinese wall, the weaponization of standards. If the U.S. uses tariffs, which are visible and loud, China uses a different weapon. China uses non-tariff barriers. These are silent. They are technical. and they are deadly effective. When China banned Japanese seafood due to radiation concerns, it was a political move. Everyone knew it. But when China rejected Indian seafood, they didn't use politics. They used hygiene standards. They used the rulebook. Chinese customs officials suddenly became extremely meticulous. They started testing every single container for trace elements. They demanded documentation that the fragmented Indian supply chain simply could not provide. This is a classic strategy of Beijing. When they want to buy from you, the borders are open. When they want to block you, they find a microscopic bacterium in a shipment and ban the entire country's output. Why is China blocking India? Because in the grand chessboard of Asia, China does not want India to succeed economically. China knows that if India captures the global manufacturing and export market, it becomes a true rival. So Beijing is systematically denying India access to its massive consumer market. They are saying, we will buy raw materials from you, but we will not buy value-added products. By citing quality issues and antibiotic residues, China achieves two goals. First, they protect their own domestic aquaculture industry, which is massive. Second, they damage brand India on the global stage. When the world's second largest economy says, your food is not safe, other countries listen. It scares away buyers in Europe. It scares away buyers in the Middle East. It is a reputational strike. India walked into a trap. They assumed that because China and Japan were fighting, China would be desperate. They forgot that in geopolitics, the enemy of your enemy is not always your customer. China would rather pay more to a neutral third party than empower a regional rival like India. And that brings us to the most surprising twist in this story. The country that actually won the contract, the European pivot, why Spain won the game. While the US was hammering India with tariffs and China was blocking them with regulations, a third player emerged. Spain. Yes, Spain. China recently announced the approval of Spanish farmed aquatic products, specifically high-end bluefin tuna. From a logistics standpoint, this makes no sense. Flying fish from Europe to China is expensive. It is far. So why did Beijing choose Madrid over New Delhi? This is where the global supply chain reset becomes clear. China is actively diversifying its supply chains away from the Anglosphere and its allies. They are building bridges with the European Union. Spain represents strategic neutrality in the trade war. But more importantly, Spain represents the new currency of trade, high trust. Let's look at the economics of the Spanish model versus the Indian model. India competes on price. Their entire model is, we can do it cheaper because our labor and land are cheap. Spain competes on process. Their model is, we can do it better because our technology and regulations are superior. The Spanish method of catching tuna, the almadraba, is ancient, but the logistics behind it are space age. Traceability protocols, cold chain integrity, digital certification. China is willing to pay a premium for this. Why? Because China is moving up the value chain. The Chinese middle class is exploding. They don't want cheap, questionable shrimp anymore. They want premium, safe, status symbol food. India is still trying to sell to the China of 2005. Spain is selling to the China of 2025. This is a critical lesson for any investor or business owner watching this. The days of the lowest bidder winning the contract are ending. In a world of geopolitical tension, reliability is worth more than affordability. Spain offers reliability. India, with its fragmented infrastructure and political baggage, represents risk. And in 2025, risk is the one thing supply chain managers are trying to eliminate. The internal rot, infrastructure versus ambition. We have blamed the US and China, but we must also look at the internal failure of India. This crisis has exposed a fatal flaw in the Make in India dream. You cannot export your way to prosperity if your infrastructure is stuck in the 19th century. The seafood crisis is a microcosm of the manufacturing crisis. In India, the supply chain is broken at the source. 70% of production comes from small, unorganized farmers. They lack access to credit. They lack access to technology. Compare this to the industrial consolidation we see. When the US imposed tariffs, Ecuadorian companies had the cash reserves to absorb the hit. Indian farmers did not. When China demanded higher hygiene standards, Vietnamese factories upgraded their equipment. Indian infrastructure simply couldn't adapt fast enough. There is a lack of cold storage warehouses. The electricity grid is unreliable in rural areas, leading to spoilage. The roads to the ports are congested. This is the internal rot that tariffs and bans only expose. The Indian government has ambitious targets. They want to double seafood exports. But ambition without infrastructure is just hallucination. The failure to capture the Chinese market proves that you cannot simply will yourself into becoming a superpower. You have to build it, mile by mile, warehouse by warehouse. And right now, India is moving too slow to catch the shifting winds of global trade. The future outlook, the fragmented world. So what does the future look like? If we zoom out, we are seeing the death of a single unified global market. We are seeing the rise of trade blocs. The world is splitting into distinct economic zones. Zone 1 is the fortress North America. The US, Canada, and Mexico. They are putting up walls, tariffs, protectionism. They want to produce everything internally or buy it from their direct neighbor. Mexico is the real winner here, replacing Asian manufacturing at a rapid pace. Zone 2 is the China-centric hub. China and its Belt and Road partners. They are creating their own standards, their own payment systems, their own supply chains. They prioritize resource security over free trade. Zone 3 is the high-standard Europe, the EU acting as a regulatory superpower, selling high-quality goods to both sides, but aligning with neither fully. And then there are the orphan economies. Countries like India that are too big to be ignored, but not integrated enough to be safe. They are stuck in the middle. They face the tariffs of the West and the blockades of the East. For the American or Canadian viewer, this means one thing. Inflation is structural. The era of cheap goods, subsidized by Indian or Chinese labor, is gone. When you block cheap imports from India to save local jobs, prices go up. When China switches to premium Spanish suppliers, global competition for quality goods goes up. Prices go up. We are trading efficiency for security. We are trading low prices for political leverage. This is the new reality of the 2025 economy. Your shrimp cocktail is now a geopolitical statement. Conclusion. The investor's takeaway. So how do you navigate this? If you are an investor or just someone trying to understand where the world is going, pay attention to non-tariff barriers. Don't just look at taxes, look at standards. Look for companies and countries that are investing in trust infrastructure, traceability, sustainability, hygiene. These are the moats of the future. Betting on cheap labor is a losing bet. Robots and AI are making cheap labor irrelevant, and tariffs are making cheap labor expensive. India learned this lesson the hard way this month. $500 million left on the table. Not because they didn't have the product, but because they didn't have the trust. In the next video, we are going to look at another massive shift. We are going to analyze how Vietnam is quietly stealing the world's factory crown while India and China fight. Is Vietnam the next superpower or just the next bubble? You need to know the answer. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our deep dive into the Vietnam phenomenon. Until then, remember, in geopolitics, there are no accidents, only strategies. Thank you for watching.